everyone. Welcome to Briar House Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have Lisa Kamolnick with us today. She is a writer, poet, vocal musician. She is a photographer and an acclaimed author. So, welcome to our program, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much, Becky. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to share a little bit about myself and my work and about the Poetry Society of Tennessee.
Lisa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm going to repeat a little bit of what you said because I just have to pinch myself every time I say I'm a poet, writer, and photographer because for 30 years I worked in the corporate world doing anything but. Now it always seeps in. But I said things like, "Oh, I'm a technical editor, I'm a contract manager, I'm a business manager, I'm a strategic manager," and now I get to say I'm a poet, writer, and photographer, and it's just a wonderful activity to be able to do after all those years. Now, I didn't I didn't step away from it completely, but there were periods of time when in my work life I just did not have time to do poetry. And there were other times I was chasing other creative things. You mentioned that I was a vocalist and musician, and that was one of those rabbits that I chased creatively at one point in my life. And I also worked in a dance troupe for a while in my life. It was like a amateur, but that was a lot of fun. I did not get to go on point in ballet when I was a teenager because our teacher moved away. I grew up in the military, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So I did when I was 30. So those are the kind of things that I've chased. And when I had time, I did poetry, and it's been really wonderful to come back to it. So I mentioned my teacher moved away. I grew up in the military, and that was a very unique lifestyle. And unlike some families, we spent most of our time living on base or on base housing. And so it was like living in two worlds at the same time. So you had this military culture and you had the civilian world, which is what we called it, culture. And I would go back and forth between them. And sometimes they were quite different. And we did everything that everyone else does everywhere else, except we didn't go to the grocery store. We went to the commissary. We didn't go to the department store. We went to the base exchange. We didn't go to church. We went to base chapel. We went to the base hospital to see doctors. We went to movies, but typically it was at the base theater. In fact, when I was 12, I can remember going to the movies in the civilian world for the first time, like without my parents, and was with my friends, and the previews had played and I was ready to stand up with my arm crossed. And that's when I learned that not every theater plays the national anthem before they start the movie. So there were a lot of things like that. In my elementary years, I was very fortunate to spend almost my entire elementary years in one place, and the base there, the housing that we had all kinds of activities, and it's a gated community. The speed limit was like 25 miles per hour everywhere. So we could just take our bikes and go wherever. And we had two pools that we could swim in, and a gym and a playground and ball fields and a bowling alley. And, all of these really cool things that we could do to stay active. And that was really interesting. And, the Air Force, it was a fully integrated community. And there
Mhm.
were people from all over the world, not just all races, that you could interact with. And I was growing up in the Deep South at that time. And it was at the tail end of segregation. It was at the time of counterculture. And then women's lib came along. And so there were a lot of things happening in my world outside the gate that were completely different than the world inside the gate. And that, I think, is what really got me thinking about some of the big questions that I ask today about what it means to be human and how our societies are different and how we are different, even though, in our very structure, we're so much alike, not only to each other as a species, but, we're all made of code. And that code isn't much different between us and an octopus and, a tree. Not really. I mean, the code's there. We're all, made of that same code. So that created a lot of curiosity for me. Now, when I moved to Germany in my teen years, that was a whole nother experience of sort of living in two worlds. Again, we lived in base housing. I actually lived in a hotel for 6 months before we got our housing. And our housing was not within a base this time. We were actually within within what they called, of course, it's another special word for not base, right? It was the German economy. And so we were right there. I could go up the road and catch a bus and go into the city and like go to the city pool and things. I could walk down the road and into a little German village, and they had these lovely bakeries and things. And there were department stores and all of that that looked very different culturally. Instead of ice cream trucks, there was a pommes frites truck which came by, and that was the best French fries I've ever had in my life. And we had some American US content, but most of it was European. So every weekend I could listen to the top 40 on the American radio station, but I could also listen to the top 40 of the European world. And the music there was so much more varied in genre than the US was. And in television, I learned that not everyone broke apart their shows with commercials. In Germany, they had whole hours that were devoted just to commercials and cartoons. And so it was a whole different process. And the way that they did, the kinds of things that they played on television were different. I found myself when we traveled walking on cobblestone roads that had been there for thousands upon thousands of years, and walking through castles. And I went to the Louvre and saw the Mona Lisa and the Venus de Milo and, all of these classic works. And I have this goofy picture of me standing next to Rodin's Thinker. So there was all of that kind of cultural aspect as well. And then because I was a teenager at that time, that's when you start studying, about the world wars and things like that. And not only did we learn about it in school, but we went on field trips and things like that. So I can remember going to Verdun, France, where some of the trench warfare happened, and we saw it, and there was a museum there, and below the museum was a mausoleum that was filled with bones of people that had not been able to be identified during the war. And it just made everything so much more visceral. This is also a time when you study things like Anne Frank and her diary. And I actually, at that time that we did this, I was the same age she was when she wrote her diary. We were actually at Anne Frank's house where she lived, and being able to see just how tiny that space was that they were in and how close they were to the danger of being discovered every single day brought it so much more to life for me. So there were all these aspects of living that, again, were these two worlds, but also bringing ideas to me that I hadn't thought of before. I was used to being around the military and the servicemen, and I grew up, at the tail end of the Vietnam War. And so I understood what war meant, but being able to see it from a whole different perspective made me think about these social questions all the more. And that threads through into present day in my writing.
Do you remember the first time that your writing became published and how that affected you?
Oh, this is so crazy. The first time that my writing was published, I'd found a break in, I had a job in the corporate world where I had this opportunity to just go crazy with poetry. I think I wrote like 100 poems, and they were all mostly terrible poems because I didn't know what I was doing, and I'd forgotten everything I'd learned. And it was a journey to come in, and I was publishing some stuff on online. And someone saw one of my poems and said, "Hey, can I put this on my web page?" I can't even remember what the what the website was or anything. It's long gone now. I haven't been able to find it. But that was the coolest thing. I was like, wow, somebody actually wanted to put my poem somewhere else. And that was probably in the early 2000s. And the next time, I think the first one that made it, I got several accepted once I joined the Poetry Society of Tennessee. I think the first one that made it to print was either Black Moon Magazine or Mildred Hahn Journal, one of those two, or possibly a society um, anthology, because I
Well,
won a contest.
how did you get involved with Poetry Society of Tennessee?
Okay, so when I got out of the corporate world for a couple of years, I was a foster parent, and my dear husband allowed me to have that experience. I did not have children of my own. I've had stepchildren; they were always teenagers, and I wanted to have that experience. And around 2019, he was like, "Hey, can we please stop doing this?" Because I asked him to do that right after his youngest left home. So he said, "Yeah, I will." And I knew I was going to come back to the creative life.
Mhm.
And so I was looking for some writing organizations. And I found some that you had to be published already. And I found some that were doing writing, but not specifically poetry. And I just couldn't find the Poetry Society online anywhere. And that's really important to me now as president of the Poetry Society to make sure that we're out there. But at any rate, my husband, who's a professor, ran across a flyer for a workshop that was put on by Lost State Writers Guild in September of 2019, and I showed up and I met a few other poets, and I attended my first workshop with Connie Jordan Green, who is just a wonderful person.
Yes.
She's done so much for poetry, and she's a fine poet, and she's a great role model for me. And then I met Rose Clicks, who at the time was the president of the Northeast Tennessee chapter of the Poetry Society of Tennessee. And that's how I finally discovered the society and became a member immediately. And then in 2020, Calvin Ross was becoming president, and he approached me to take on a role, one of two. And the one that made sense was communications because of my corporate communications background. I had 10 years as a corporate communications rep. And as the Poetry Society of Tennessee reached a point where they just had too much administrative body and they couldn't sustain that, and they collapsed all of the chapters, they approached me about becoming president. And I was nominated for the president-elect in 2022 and then served a term as president in 23. And now we have 2-year terms, and I'm in year one of a 2-year term here. And it's been an amazing organization to work with.
And it has a 70-year history. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's been around since 1953, and I feel a great sense of responsibility to continue the traditions that and make sure that we're attaining the mission that this, because the mission has not changed in all of this time, and to make sure that we're around for another 70 years. So as president, I still do some communications work, so sort of like other duties as required. That's part of the president role, I think. But
Right.
my primary role there is to make sure that we're attaining our mission and to be, connecting people and ideas together, and helping generate interest in the programs that we have, expanding programs where appropriate, modernizing operations. We spent a lot of time the last couple of years figuring out how we can go from doing everything by snail mail to getting things online, and we've accomplished that. You can apply for things online, and you can pay online, and things like that. And we've also worked hard to beef up those areas of our mission that needed some beefing up. So let me talk about the mission, I guess, a little bit. First and foremost, we're creating a supportive community for poets of all ages and all experience levels. And now primarily who's meeting are adults, but it is open to high school students. But we have programs that reach anywhere from elementary school all the way up into, we've got members that are octogenarians and maybe a nonagenarian among us. So we've got, all kinds of ages and experience levels. And this community is designed to just help people connect, because connections are so important. But it's not just a social club. We are focused on helping poets to grow and develop, meeting them where they live and providing programs that help them grow. So whether it's a monthly program that focuses on a particular aspect of poetry or a form, for example, or gives you a generative time, and that's so important for many of us, or if it's small study groups or critique groups, an open mic opportunity. And of course, we're not all things to all people, and we're not all over the place all the time. And we know there are a lot of other organizations out there. So we try to find out as much as we can about what else is going on across the state and share that information, whether it's a workshop or an open mic or another organization or some sort of event. Another part of our mission is to promote the recognition of poets, increase the recognition of poets and poetry across the state and beyond. And we do that through providing member bios on our website and featuring them on social media. We now have a virtual bookstore for our members who are authors, and so they can be featured with their bio, and there's links to their books so that people can discover their books in multiple ways. And we know, marketing is another skill set that our members need, and being able to help them boost their marketing is really important to us. And we celebrate all the wins of our members in newsletters and on social media. And then we want to be sure that we're fostering the next generation of poets and poetry lovers. That's why we're reaching out to that younger group. We want to be a place that people of all ages can discover poetry, whether they intend to write it or whether they whether they discover that they love it and they enjoy it and become part of it and become better readers of poetry to appreciate it more. And so those are our missions, and we have a lot of programs in place to try to attack those. And we're a volunteer-led organization, so to the degree that people step into roles, we're open to all kinds of things happening. But first and foremost, I really want to work on connecting us better across the state.
Lisa, one of the things that you do as a writer is that you practice different forms of writing. And some people are a little bit scared to try new forms. So tell us how you got started in being brave and try those
So,
new forms.
yeah, so form, there's probably three ways that I kind of discover form. And the first way happened I guess kind of organically. It was like that year that I wrote those 100 poems, it was back when there wasn't much online then. It was pretty early days, but Yahoo had these affinity groups, and some of them were focused on particular forms. So that was where I first played around with form poems, other than like college survey courses where you did some things. And I continue to use the internet as a source for discovering forms of poetry. And it's a great way to practice your craft. You just go, oh, what's this form, and try it out. But when I joined the society, some other opportunities really opened up to me. And one of them was, I talked about our monthly meetings where we look at an aspect of poetry, and occasionally those are looking at particular forms. And I love it when we do that deep dive, because typically it starts from here's the beginning of when it was developed up to here's how it's being used today, and you get this really broad look at what's possible within a poem, and you get exposed to a lot of different writers over a lot of different periods of time sometimes, and that's really helpful to a writer to think about ways that they can approach a form poem. And then the other way that I've discovered forms is through the contest that societies hold. And then also some, lit mags. Some lit mags are very focused on a particular form. Haiku comes to mind. But I also think about, like, Rattle just recently had their tribute to the Hyben. And so you can discover a form that way, and possibly, that's a pathway to publication. Another thought around form is, some people are a little bit shy about it because, well, if they write mostly free verse, which is what I do also, it's like, well, if I throw a couple of sonnets in there, isn't that going to make my collection weird if you're to the point that you're working on it? And I was listening to a talk by Kim Adenizio, and she had been talking about putting collections together. And I can't remember if it was one of her talking points or a question that came from the audience, but there was that concern of, well, isn't that going to mess things up? And isn't it just too different? And she said something that stuck with me, and it was that our voice isn't really that different. Our voice is our voice. And so, if you take poems that are different forms and they don't connect thematically, they're going to stand out. But if all of your poems, no matter what form they are, connect together when you're trying to put them into some sort of collection, they're going to flow. You're going to make them flow. And that gave me a lot of freedom after I heard that talk to not worry, because I was concerned, well, I'm going to write these form poems for contests and I'm never going to be able to use them for anything else. Well, no, that's not true.
Right.
In fact, some of the ones that I put in that didn't make it in contest have been published in lit mags. So, there's room there. And in some cases, it got me published because I tried a form I'd never tried before, and it won a prize. So you never know. And for anyone who's nervous about it, just dive in. I've done a lot. I'm not going to be able to remember them. I actually have a list of some of the forms that I've tried over the last few years, and it's pretty extensive. Blank verse, centos, and cane, contrapuntal, dorsimbra, ethery, Fibonacci, golden shovel, haibun, haiku, huitain, lili banel, nani, pirouette, prose poems, quintilla, rubaiyat, senryu, sestino, salage, villanelle. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. Um, I also have played around with sonnets, and I'm the traditional stuff. I feel like I butcher it. I'm not there. It doesn't fit me. But when I found the American sonnet, I thought that was really interesting because it's much more freewheeling and it's kind of jazzy and improvisational. And I ran across one that really struck me in a workshop that Ed Mabry gave. He had us do some, it was basically like free writing really fast, and then he would throw stuff at us that we had to add in. And at the end of all of this, we ended up with 14 lines, the 14th of which was a question from Pablo Neruda's Book of Questions. And it was the workshop was designed to get you out of your edit mode. Mm-hmm. And I can go there pretty quickly. So it really appealed to me. And I've written like 13 or 14 of these. I don't know where I'm going with them yet, but it's been something very interesting. And then one that I found in my going out on the internet and searching for things is a haiku sonnet. For anyone who's not aware of that, that's just basically a sequence of 4 haikus, and then you tack on a couplet of, in this instance, the form I found, I'm sure there's variations, was 2 7-syllable lines. And I actually ended up, because I tried it, I submitted it, and it was published one of them was published in Myos Micros a few years back. So, it's a pathway to publication as much as exploring the art and craft of poetry.
And it really sounds like it really enhances your life as well as it opens up a new world of writing. Lisa, will you read some of your work for us?
Absolutely. I will start with a poem that was published in Women Speak, Volume 7. This is the one poem I actually haven't submitted again to Women Speak, and I was so delighted to get to know more than just the name Carrie Gunter Seymour as a result of that experience. She's another one of those poets who's just been so amazing in promoting poetry and promoting Appalachian people in particular. And she actually helped me discover more about my Appalachian roots, because I had relatives from places that I didn't realize were in Greater Appalachia until I got involved in that project. So it was very interesting to me. This poem is called Samba. I can hear Rio from 4,833 miles away, clear to Tennessee's upper right corner. She sashays in on a Latinate wind. A bowed bateria beats an invitation in synchronized syncopation. Dance with me. Trees sway, lay an undeniably recognizable rhythm, born in West Africa, rooted in Brazil, blown to God's country. Wind's aspirate hisses slither along oaks, tip to root, as trails of butterflies float ever higher in filigree flutter. Shrill songbird trills and cheeps repeat. Geese gaggle in a brassy airborne parade, lay down their sensual moans in the music. Can you feel it? A Brazilian invocation blows across Appalachia. Rio rubs rocky top stubbled winter ridges, lays hands on a hollow shapely form. Hips tilted, gyrating, Brazil rolls through fertile fields to my homestead on a snow-dusted hill. Anapido's infectious inflection settles in, moves me, praise me. Will music save me? Is God on the way? Maybe I'll find him come Ash Wednesday. This next one was published in Heartwood Literary Magazine. It was a semi-finalist for their contest, the inaugural year that they created the Heartwood Literary or the Heartwood Poetry Prize, and it is called Pining for Home, and it kind of goes back to a place that I lived once I returned from Germany, and that's in the Panhandle of Florida. Mm-hmm. Draped over water's edge at dusk, branches needle Paquito Bayou. A lonesome stand of Florida pines faces a deciduous tree line dotted with civilization. A bridge span, cell tower, low-rise condos and homes border the scene. A sunset sienna reflections ripple as mellow waters fade to shadowed charcoal inshore. In loblolly shade, two legs dangle from exposed root. Feet dip into the brackish border of land and water like bait on thick fishing line to snag a lost memory. A splash of feet speak. We knew a time before the plunder. We never walked today's agglomeration of boat-docked, fenced-in, hefty waterfront homes. The body remembers how we traced sandy trails to secret fishing holes and caught unearthly creatures. It remembers holding a baseball bat in knee-deep water and hitting a tennis ball into blue, bolting like barracuda around imaginary bases. It remembers racing to the island, lazing on the dock before Opal washed them away. The body remembers how dolphins evaded our chase and out of reach breaches and leaps. It remembers watching walls of wet weather wash in. It remembers the smell of summer rain. The body remembers handfuls of goopy, soft scooped up and tossed baby jellyfish and the fierce sting of grown ones nettled into flesh. The body remembers what left: people, pines, an indigenous playground. In darkness, legs lift from a root and feet shuffle in salted sand. A soul ponders how pine roots run so deep in sand, revels in the briny weight of rain. Isn't that the way from birth? We feel our way home.
That's powerful, Lisa.
Oh,
Lisa,
thank
do
you.
you remember um, when you became a spoken word poet? I don't think you've added that to your bio yet.
I don't really consider myself a spoken word poet. I will say that when I went to the National Federation of State Poetry Societies convention virtually, and they had started shifting to include performance poetry in addition to, just page and reading from the page. And reading from a page is also performing poetry. It's just a different, it's a different variety of it. They encouraged me to do it. I always had felt like, oh man, I was the singer that would forget lines. Like to songs I wrote, I could forget lines. So I
Right.
always thought, oh, I'm too old now, and I can't do it. And so I was encouraged to try. Um, Bill Hill, who is a member of our society, actually got on the slam circuit that first year. And I said, well, if Bill can do this, I can do this. And so I tried it and I started working on recitation. And so when I perform, the thing that's really interesting for me, it's all about adrenaline load for me. There are some venues that I come in where the adrenaline load is really high because it's a new venue or there's some people there that I'm fairly new to poetry. I started really back in 2019 doing it very seriously. And so I can get this sort of imposter syndrome in my head and that can affect me. And then sometimes if I've just memorized a poem or if it's been a while and I'm afraid I'm going to forget it, I can be a little bit more nervous about performing, but I'm always focused on the audience. I want to deliver something that helps them to feel and that connects with them. And as an audience member, I'm leaning in, always to them, to the person who's reading. And one of my favorite things is when poets that I've read their work on page,
Mhm.
they present it somehow and I get to hear them present it in their voice. And that's just really fun for me.
I think, Lisa, you're fabulous. I mean,
Oh, thank
seriously,
you.
you should do your one woman show. You could do a monologue. It would be wonderful. I would definitely want to go see that.
Oh,
Lisa,
thank you.
thank you so much for spending time with us today at Briar House Writes. Tell us where we can find your work.
Oh, okay. You can find me. I do have a website at www.lisakamolnick. That's Kam as in Mary, Oln as in Nancy, ICK.com. And you can find information out about Poetry Society of Tennessee at poetrytennessee.org. And both myself and the society are on Facebook and Instagram. Would
Mhm.
love to connect with any of you out there that are looking for a community for poetry or to learn more about what's going on. And you'll also find me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you so much for what you do to promote poetry in Tennessee. And I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today, Becky. It's been a pleasure.